So we begin briefly, my part is brief, to talk a little bit about um, what is Catholic social teaching. So we want to talk about what is exactly is Catholic social teaching and what does it say about labor. So let's begin our conversation about work. What is labor then? One of the ways that labor is used in Scripture is that it's a word to describe something that is toil or exhausting, to be exhausted with toil or grief. It implies difficulties, trouble, exhaustion. In the New Testament period, it was used sometimes to refer to athletic training, and it was also used to refer at times to those who were the most downtrodden in the Roman society. It's used quite frequently throughout Scripture, more than 20 times in the New Testament, as I said, and Paul used it to refer to the quality of work that we should engage in as we work for the Lord, so that when we work for the Lord, we labor. He chose that word intentionally. I'm sorry. So, one way to think about this is, what is a Christian work ethic? Again, we turn to Scripture. Genesis reminds us that God worked to create the world, that God planned it, there was intentionality, that there was effort, that it was laborious, that God worked, and that God needed to rest after this. This is, I think, an important theme as we form our own ethic of work, to realize that work is holy and work is purposeful. Colossians says that we are called to work heartily and we are called to work willingly and wholeheartedly. That work is to share in God's creativity. That work isn't just a means to an end, but work is a powerful, transformative experience for us. When we engage in work, we get to share in God's creative powers. We get to share in building the kingdom of God. Work is to be meaningful, just, and life-giving. Economic justice is a central theme in Scripture, and its beginnings in Catholic social teaching, its more formalized beginnings, you could say, goes back to Rerum Novarum, a encyclical that was published in 1891. A picture, it said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this picture is an example of some of the conditions that we saw in this country and in other parts of the world as well. This is from the early 1900s, 1901, children working at a labor mill. And, you know, the key phrase in this picture is that it was children working instead of going to school. We know that the conditions for these children factories were dangerous, the work was hard, the machines were hot and dangerous. Many children lost their lives or lost limbs or were injured or maimed in a variety of ways. And that little guy there in the front doesn't even have his shoes on. And this is another picture. That child is barely tall enough and is standing up on something to be able to reach the apparatus at this mill. So the general principles of Catholic social teaching, I just want to go over them very briefly. And they are as follows. This idea that the life and dignity of every human person is valued above all other things, so that would inform our understanding of work or labor. The notion of call to family, community, and participation, that there are such things as rights and responsibilities, that the option for the poor and vulnerable should be foremost for us, and that workers have rights and they have dignity, solidarity, and care of creation. So, what does that first principle mean? Dignity. What does it mean in our age of technology? It means a couple of things. First of all, to recognize the dignity of life at all ages and all stages of life, womb to tomb is the common phrase, that human beings have a spiritual and a social nature, and work needs to contribute to that. Catholic social teaching challenges what's called sometimes the techno secularization, the idea that work exists just for work, or that work sole purpose is to make money. Making money is a necessary and important function connected to work, but there has to be more to work than that. Several of the more recent popes have written about human dignity in the age of technology. And one thing I think is important for us to remember is that we are more interdependent now than ever before in human history. Interdependent, needing each other. And yet, unfortunately, individualism is flourishing more now than ever before. And individualism is just that, a focus on self and a disregard for others in the human community. And those two things cannot be coexisting well. The second principle is what we call to family, community, and participation. This stresses the notion of the common good, that work and other structures need to exist on behalf of, in support of all people, not just individuals. And the common good is recognizing our interdependence. Social structures have to be just, and that we are called to evaluate policies, procedures, laws that support these structures, and social problems must be addressed by community networks. A very brief example, let's say you talk about somebody like Steph Curry, a fantastic a basketball player, and you might say, well, hey, his accomplishments and all the money and everything, it's his alone. It's because of his God-given talent. And that's true, but the common goods lens says yes, and we also have to contextualize this. He also benefited from the support of his family, his parents, coaches, fans, advertising, all those things. So it's the idea of giving credit where credit is due. Catholic social principle on rights and responsibilities says that human dignity and true community is achieved only if rights are protected and responsibilities are met. We cannot have rights without corresponding responsibilities. The Catholic social teaching called the option for the poor and vulnerable is simply a call to remind us that we have a moral obligation to be concerned for others, especially those who are most vulnerable. We are our brothers and sisters keepers. Gandhi said a nation's greatness would be assessed by how well or not well it took care of those who were the weakest members in society. The principle that's called dignity of work and the rights of workers says that the economy must serve the people, not vice versa. And I'll say that one again. The economy must serve people and not vice versa. Work is more than an income. It is a way of participating in God's creation and in sharing in God's creativity. If work is going to have dignity, then basic rights must be protected. What are some of those rights? The right to productive work, the right to fair and just wages, the right to organizing and collective bargaining, the right to private property, the right to economic initiative. That's what just and fair work looks like. What does unjust work look like? It looks like this: children processing e-waste in China, children harvesting cocoa in Ghana, or children mining cobalt in the Congo. The principle of solidarity is also something that much has been written about in recent years. Pope John Paul II described it as, it's not a vague feeling, it's not a warm fuzzy, it's a firm determination, it's a choice, it's an act of the will. It's a determination to work on behalf of not just oneself, but on others. That's what solidarity is. It's way past emotions and feelings. The last principle of Catholic social teaching is described as care of creation. Justice must be part of the environmental policies because as we look at climate change and all of the various challenges associated with that, it's not just a scientific issue. Climate change disproportionately affects people who live off the land, who are most vulnerable. And the last one, what is the purpose of work? We work to share in God's creativity. The value of work is not because it gives us money or identity or a sense of self-worth. Those things can come from work, of course, but our work matters because our work is meant to be in service of others. Since we are having a musical evening, I just want to have you listen very briefly to this song by a group called Porter's Gate. And it's called We Labor Unto Glory.
Silence, please. Labor unto glory, take 5. Margaret.
My God, wherever I go, glory. Where I reap and where I sow, glory. And my hands, they grip the thorn, glory. In the still and in the storm, glory. Glory. Oh, we labor unto glory till heaven and earth are one. Oh, we labor unto glory until God's kingdom comes. The sun, it shines and then goes down, glory. Rain, it pours and beats the ground, glory. Dust, it blows and ends my days, glory. Hearts, they burn beneath your gaze, glory. Glory. Oh, we labor unto glory till heaven and earth are one. Oh, we labor unto glory until God's kingdom comes. My heart, my hands, their kingdom bound, glory. Where thorns no longer curse the ground, glory. Trim the wick, ignite the flame, glory. My work here will not be in vain, glory. Glory. Oh, we labor unto glory till heaven and earth are one. Oh, we labor unto glory until God's kingdom comes. Oh, we labor unto glory till heaven and earth are one. Oh, we labor unto glory until God's kingdom comes. Until God's kingdom comes. Until God's kingdom comes.
Good evening. Thank you, Mara. I am Dr. Regina Matheson, and I have been a part of St. Ambrose for about 22 years. And my primary work has been mostly in the sociology department, which is why I've had the honor of putting together this piece about Father William O'Connor. And it has been enlightening indeed. I've been working on this since the fall of 2017, when I learned I would be giving the talk at our annual presidential assembly in the spring semester in January, where we highlight someone who has been part of the Catholic intellectual tradition. In 2018, that was Father William O'Connor, and I had the honor of doing that. So I'm really happy to do a little bit more extended version of that and to have delved into a little bit more of what he had to offer the community. So I would first like to begin by offering a few thank yous to Father Brian Miklo, Dr. Jessica Roizen, Dr. Mara Adams, and most importantly, the late Father Joseph Kochon, for allowing me to expand on the brief presentation to the Faculty Assembly on January 16th in 2018, highlighting Father William O'Connor. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge Father George McDaniel, who's sitting way back there, and offer thanks to him for his devotion to the history of St. Ambrose, because without his research and writing, we would be certain to forget the legacy of many Ambrosians, especially Father William O'Connor. This presentation is a first in the Fathers Joseph Kochon Endowment Memorial Series. I made that up. Hope that's okay. I would also like to acknowledge those in the audience who are present, you can just raise your hand. I know you're here somewhere. Who've had firsthand experiences with Father Kochon, who may have been a student of Father Kochon, or not Father Kochon, Father O'Connor. Firsthand experiences with Father O'Connor, been a student of Father O'Connor, or who are family or friends of Father William O'Connor. So just raise your hands. So we have a few of those. Also, on behalf of the university, I would like to thank you for attending. All right. Father Bill O'Connor and Father Kochon shared a commitment to peace and social justice embodied in the Catholic spirit, Catholic social teachings, and the Catholic intellectual tradition. I have come to learn a great deal about Father William O'Connor, and I'm delighted to share with you all what I've come to understand. I have listed here some of Father O'Connor's professional accomplishments, which are quite a few. And I've also here, I know this is a lot of words and we're not supposed to put this many words on a slide, but I wanted to highlight some of the things from his obituary in 1984. He was known as the labor priest, which we will get into. But Father O'Connor was an outspoken champion of the union movement and became known as a labor priest during his more than 30 years as a teacher at St. Ambrose College in Davenport and Loyola University in Chicago. He was ordained to the priesthood by Bishop Henry Rollman in May 1933 at Sacred Heart Cathedral here in Davenport. Father O'Connor remained in touch with labor union affairs even after his retirement. He became involved in the bitter strike at the Clinton Corn Processing Plant in 1979 and 1980. I did find a picture of his gravestone, so I thought I would put that in here as well. All right. Father O'Connor carried out what many, if not all of us, embody either professionally or personally on a daily basis, the Josist methodology, to see, judge, and act. So how did Father William O'Connor and the notion to see, act, and judge fit into the context of the Catholic intellectual tradition and under the umbrella of Catholic social teachings, to the end of Catholic social action? As Terence Tilley in 2000 writes, in inventing Catholic tradition, the content is difficult to articulate, and at times the practitioners are difficult to determine. Bernard Brady further elaborates on the Jostist idea to see, judge, and act. In his articulation that as thoughts come together and we begin to see and discuss our truths, within that discussion is the space where we create change. One thing becomes clear when thinking about Catholic social teachings and the Catholic intellectual tradition as they inform Catholic social action, and that is, the university becomes a place where conversations are explored and the truth sought in every discipline for that which we believe and don't believe. The purpose of the institution is the intellectual development of persons within a Catholic context. We begin to see that the universe is intelligible and that as humans, we long for the quest for truth. I think this is it. The university as a context for the Catholic intellectual tradition encourages inquiry that may be in opposition to faith, and that such inquiry could reveal more truth about God. And it thrives only with the participation of all who seek the truth, including those whose inquiries lead them to question whether the search reveals purpose, meaning, or God, or to conclude that it does not. The work of Father William O'Connor in his days at St. Ambrose College show that he was dedicated to service. He taught sociology and philosophy. He chaired the sociology department, but most importantly, his dedication to race and ethnic relations and labor were his most notable and public contributions to the Catholic social encyclicals. The most influential for Father O'Connor was written on May 5th of 1891 when Pope Leo XIII wrote the Rerum Novarum that Mara mentioned, that highlighted capital unions in labor and the condition of the working class. Noted as one of the most significant of all encyclicals, the Rerum Novarum broke down the barriers that separated the church from the worker. This was the first time the church had spoken so officially on such matters. There was general agreement that the church could foster a remedy for the misery and wretchedness unjustly impacting the working class. Needless to say, Father William O'Connor was inspired by this particular encyclical and became a very spirited advocate for the common worker in the labor force. He felt a call to action, and act he did. Father O'Connor and his colleagues used the classroom as a forum for the church's social teachings on the matter of labor. One student recalls that Father O'Connor was ringing our ears for Rerum Novarum, according to George McDaniel. 1941 was the 50th anniversary of the Rerum Novarum, and Father O'Connor organized a social justice conference to commemorate it. The goal of this conference was to develop a better understanding of the great purposes of human society and a better appreciation of the social values of human life. There were many distinguished speakers who attended this conference. One of Father O'Connor's students recalls this conference on campus, and he indicated that it was an eye-opener for the entire student body. This was a conversation I had with Bill Nagel in November of 2017. Father William O'Connell, as well as his brother Ed, created plenty of opportunity for students to apply the concepts about race and ethnic relations and labor that they had learned in the classroom. In 1948, the students were encouraged by Father O'Connor to form a club. So they did, and it was called the Interracial Club. One of the tasks of the Interracial Club was to conduct a Quad City survey regarding the economic status of African Americans that addressed living conditions, educational levels, job status, and salary. What the students found was not at all surprising for the era, and it should not come as a surprise that in 1949, the survey results revealed that there was a high degree of discrimination in Davenport, as African Americans could not patron restaurants, hotels, barbershops, or buy a home except for in a few designated areas, and the jobs that they were able to secure did not provide the basic necessities for their families. In 1951, a student of Father O'Connor's, Mike Lawrence, was undoubtedly impacted by the activism Bill was engaged in and decided to form a club called the League for Social Justice, or a group called the League for Social Justice. The goal of this group was to promote the principles of the papal encyclicals on labor, to promote trade unionism and labor, and to work toward the complete integration of Negro, Mexican, and other minority groups into American society, was a quote. This group was not opposed to working independently and without the blessing of the Father. This group was well versed on the applicable encyclicals and living the liturgy, and identified as their organizing group principle an indispensable basis for Christian social action. As a result of the students' interpretation of the encyclicals and desire to live the liturgy, the League for Social Justice decided to focus their action on rent-controlled housing, the survey results investigating racial discrimination in Davenport, and to identify and publish the results of the survey. In the fall of 1951, a booklet titled Citizen Second Class, Negro Segregation and Discrimination in Davenport was published, and it included a definition of a second-class citizen and information about the discrimination of African Americans in Davenport as it related to health, employment, organizations, recreation, and housing. And I know you can't read this, so I'm going to read it to you. There are first-class citizens and there are second-class citizens. First-class citizens pay taxes, send their sons to war, obey traffic regulations, vote, and do all the things the law requires. They do other things too. They apply for jobs and hold them, knowing that the only thing they have to worry about is their ability to produce. They go to any hotel in town, any restaurant, or to any doctor or dentist, for that matter, with the confidence that as long as they can pay the bill, they'll get the service that they pay for. They can buy or rent a house wherever they want to, or can find one. They are free and equal citizens. They participate in the life of their community to the fullest extent. They are first-class citizens. Second-class citizens are people who don't have a chance to participate. It's not because they don't want to or don't deserve to. They pay taxes, they send their sons to war, they obey traffic regulations, they vote, and they do all the other things the law requires, just like first-class citizens. They fulfill the requirements but aren't permitted to participate. They are forced to remain second-class citizens for only one reason: the color of their skin. There are some 2,500 second-class citizens in Davenport. Here, in 7 sections in this story and the story of the sort of discrimination and segregation that has brought them into being and keeps them from becoming anything more than what they are. So this booklet conveyed that this group of second-class citizens paid taxes, sent their sons to war, voted, and obeyed the law, but because of the color of their skin, second-class citizens were denied the wide range of economic and social opportunities the city offered. The statements made in this booklet about discrimination in Davenport urged white Davenport to open its mind, study the facts, and then summon the courage to change. In other words, to see, judge, and act. In 1949, Father O'Connor had organized another group, the Industrial and Human Relations Council, where he divided into subgroups that included a labor study group, an interracial group, and an economic survey group. The latter group, in the spring of 1949, engaged in a comprehensive survey of Mexican Americans who lived at Cook's Point. Cook's Point was located in southwest Davenport, between South Howell Street and the entrance to Credit Island. A little bit easier to see that one. 270 people lived in 56 homes on a U-shaped unpaved street that had no running water, no sewer, and only one water pump to serve all 270 residents. These are some images of Cook's Point. You'll see the Purina plant in the back there. A few short weeks after the 1951 publication of Citizen Second Class, the League for Social Justice became involved with discrimination against Mexican Americans living at Cook's Point. The Cook's Point landowner was forcing the Mexican American families off the land so that a factory could be built on the property. The League for Social Justice students became strong advocates and a voice for these Mexican American families who had no other place to go because of housing discrimination in the city of Davenport. The Social Justice League appeared in front of the city council on behalf of these families and eventually assisted them in moving to another area of Davenport with the help of 24 other St. Ambrose Seminary recruits. Some of you may recognize these individuals. These students were significantly influenced by Father William O'Connor and his activism. According to Father McDaniel, their time at St. Ambrose and their involvement with the League prepared them for future battles against injustice and discrimination. The study of the social encyclicals, their discussion of the place of the liturgy and worship in their lives, their contact with the Josist methodology, and their education at St. Ambrose were the keys to their activism. Their education had combined the theoretical with the practical, and it had changed them, end quote. Father O'Connor is an excellent example of a practitioner of the Catholic intellectual tradition, and that of Catholic social action. His passion regarding race relations and discriminatory practices in Davenport and his dedication to the labor movement governed his practices and actions. His application of Josist methodology to see, judge, and act permeated to his students, who stated that if Father O'Connor came into class carrying 6 books, you knew the discussion was going to be about labor and not ontology. From the late Father Hines in an interview with him on November 29th, 2017. Father O'Connor was recognized by the late 1940s as the most visible and vocal of all priests involved in Catholic social action at St. Ambrose. His efforts addressing social justice issues did not end when he explored discrimination, race, and housing, as well as economic disparities among Davenport minorities. That was only the beginning of the many years he dedicated to labor concerns. His perspectives were viewed as quite controversial and strongly supporting disenfranchised populations. He had been identified by the public as being a labor man, if not a communist. He was central to putting St. Ambrose on the social justice map when in March of 1949 he suggested that St. Ambrose host a conference themed Christian Social Responsibility. He wasn't allowed to chair the conference, but did much of the work to make the conference successful. as is common with most individuals who rock the right boat that disturbs the minds of oppressive others. A reverend reporting for American Magazine reported that the conference was one of the greatest things the church had done in this country. Ambrosian News wrote there was never in the past so great an interest on the campus in social problems as now. Father O'Connor spent much of his adult life advocating and doing for oppressed others. His most significant and most memorable contributions were those he made to laborers and his dedication to their fair and just treatment. He was not at all opposed to challenging local manufacturing leaders when it came to how their workers were treated. In the January 17, 1955 edition of Time magazine, Father O'Connor's support of labor and labor unions was front and center as a strong proponent for the UAW. There was a labor dispute here with International Harvester and the UAW and the National League of NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. In this piece, O'Connor was described as a labor priest who has fought for 22 years in Rock Island for what he calls vigorous American unionism, often over the protests of Quad City businessmen. In the last 7 years, Father O'Connor has set up 30 labor schools for working men in his district to fight communist infiltration, notably in the Farm Equipment Workers Union, which was thrown out of the CIO, the Committee of Industrial Organization, in 1949. Father O'Connor was highlighted because of his outreach to other local Catholic leaders and churches to read from the pulpit a statement supporting the CIO and the UAW as something that good Catholics who know the evils of atheist communism should vote. It was very controversial. The sentiment about Father O'Connor was that he had significant influence on the outcome of this labor election, and the CIO UAW won the election and essentially had broken the back of the red-led union in the farm equipment industry, which is what that story is about in that particular issue of Time magazine. He had developed a national reputation for being an open and strong supporter of labor unions, and by the late 1950s was commonly known as the labor priest. He became very well known in political and labor circles, and his efforts were supported by President John F. Kennedy, while his involvement often questioned and investigated by the FBI. Father William O'Connor understood and conveyed to others the social injustices occurring in our society. He advocated on behalf of disenfranchised groups in society and instilled in his students a sense of compassion and a need to act. This is at the core of the Catholic intellectual tradition and Catholic social action. And the university is a place where such passions and conversations have historically emerged. St. Ambrose University has a rich history of developing, inspiring, and acting on issues related to peace and justice, and Father William O'Connor is a very notable one of many who at the core lived the Josist ideology that permeated his classroom and his pulpit. As this presentation is the first in the Father Joseph Coke-John series that honors Father William O'Connor's efforts and achievements, I want to highlight the two songs that are played by the Central High School Wind Ensemble, who again we really appreciate preparing for and participating in this event. The concluding song, Ludlow, depicts the tragic events involving organized labor known as the Ludlow Massacre of 1914. The song, written to depict the 14 months that 10 to 12,000 Colorado coal miners were on strike, living with their families in makeshift tents because operators of the coal mines failed to meet a list of 7 demands. This should sound familiar because of what Mara just said. This is a picture of what their community would have looked like. And these are the demands that were not met. Recognition of the union, an 8-hour work week, 8-hour workday, the right to elect their own selected check weighman, a 10% increase in wages on the tonnage rates, the right to trade in any store, choose their own doctors and their own boarding places, as well as the enforcement of established Colorado mining laws and abolition of the company guard system. While all these demands seemed quite reasonable at the time, they were not afforded to certain groups of workers. The death special was an armored vehicle sent in by the mining industry to oppose the strike and to harass the families and their tent colonies. The initial song we heard, Fanfare for the Common Man, written for the patriotic response as America entered World War II, was inspired by a speech delivered by U.S. Vice President Henry Wallace, where he declared the 20th century to be the century of the common man. Fast forward to roughly 80 years later and into the first quarter of the 21st century, where we are now, where we have now encountered a new understanding of the common worker that we are all now very familiar with, called the essential worker, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Should we consider the category of essential workers as a contemporary form of disenfranchised worker? Essential workers have been recently and more formally recognized by our federal entities as those whose work is essential to continue critical infrastructure operations, despite the risk in the following sectors: grocery stores, public transportation, agriculture, food service and protection, healthcare, childcare, critical retail, critical trade, energy and defense, critical areas of public safety, and social service organizations. Prior to the world encountering the pandemic, these occupation categories were more commonly defined by the International Standard Classification of Occupations, ISCO. They were classified by their skill level and specified as low or medium skill level workers. It took a pandemic and many of us asking, where is the Charmin? I had to get that in here somewhere, to elevate these workers to an essential level for society to function. Much of the essential work performed in our communities in these sectors is often made up of low-wage workers, women, people of color, and immigrants. Because of these demographic factors, such essential workers are more likely to be victims of wage theft and work in places that better lend themselves to exploitation. The Department of Labor, as a result of COVID-19 and the new developments about essential workers, has committed to enhancing the welfare of these critical workers in these categories. One might ask, well, what can I do to assist in the betterment of essential workers in my community? In the Joseph spirit of Catholic social action, I have one current example here of how we might gain more insight to enhance our knowledge and, as a result, potentially see an enlightened version of a common perspective to encourage social action. To be more Josephist regarding individuals whose essential work encompasses the agriculture sector should be something in our community to which we can easily apply a Josephist ideology in action. This is a virtual event taking place over the next couple of days to provide some insight into and about these important essential workers. Some of you may recall the recent editorial in the Quad City Times on March 2nd, 2022 by our very own Bishop Zinkula, titled, "Help All Essential Workers," where he asked our community and our elected officials to walk in solidarity with immigrant workers who were not allowed access to the $33.6 million in funds earmarked for Scott County COVID-19 pandemic relief. Despite the fact that these essential workers approached the Scott County Board of Supervisors and request that the board consider their financial needs and the hours that they contributed to essential work in our county rather than their immigration status in order to provide some financial assistance with those earmarked funds. The request to extend funds to immigrant workers who were excluded from COVID-19 stimulus checks still had not been granted by the board as of March 18th, 2022. This contemporary example of an essential worker who is also an immigrant makes me curious about what action Father William O'Connor would have taken as a call to Catholic social action. Bishop Zinkula took the opportunity to publicly denounce a decision by local elected officials and convey to them the importance of essential workers and to highlight the extent to which immigrants contribute to the economy through essential work, and requested that they reconsider their vote to deny the funds. I have no doubt that Father William O'Connor would have done the same thing, and perhaps not as politely as did Bishop Zinkula. As we reflect on the work of Father Bill O'Connor and those who live in our society as oppressed citizens, and for those who advocate on behalf of oppressed communities, our challenge as individuals, as groups, as teachers, as students, as leaders, as well as our Ambrosian community remains. That there will always be injustices for which we will fight hard to eliminate, and we should continue to be inspired by those from our St. Ambrose community who before us were fighting and making a difference on many of the same issues that continue to exist today. We know as a community that we are never and have never been alone in the fight for human rights, equality, and justice for all. We must continue the legacy of Father William O'Connor and act as we are called to help foster a just society by acknowledging the dignity and worth of individuals and oppressed groups. My intent this evening is for you to walk away not only having more knowledge about Father William O'Connor, but to also have a more thorough understanding of the Catholic intellectual tradition and how it translates for those who embody it into Catholic social action, especially within the context of peace and justice. I am hopeful that I accomplished that. You will see future events that relate to this one, hopefully one in the fall, highlighting more specifically the topics that Father Cope John intended to support with his very generous donation to the university to promote peace and justice. I thank you for your time. But as we close, I would like to, do you want to talk now? Okay. As we close, I would like to hand the mic over to Mr. Alexander Wilga, the Central High School Wind Symphony conductor, because he has a few words to share as well. Oh, awesome.
How about a big round of applause?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful words. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. Thank you for having us here. It is a pleasure to play for you. The piece we're gonna perform for you, you got a little bit of information on, is entitled Ludlow, April 20th, 1914. And this piece we performed back in October, and if we can rewind that far in our community, you know that at that point in time, a lot of our lives were touched by the strike that was happening between the UAW and John Deere. And we, as an ensemble, all of us decided that we wanted to learn a little bit more about that and play something that had a lot more contextual meaning than just playing a piece of music. It was something that actually affected our lives. With the Ludlow Massacre, this happened in Colorado, Ludlow, Colorado. I'm going to read exactly what Roland Barrett, the composer of this, has in his program notes, and then add a little bit of my research that I have come up with on as well. The piece was inspired by the tragic events of the Ludlow Massacre, the deadliest single incident in the Southern Colorado coal strike of 1913 to 1914, and one of the United States' most dramatic and violent confrontations between organized labor and corporate management. In September of 1913, the United Mine Workers Association called for all of its coal miners in Colorado to walk off the job, striking for improved conditions, better wages, and recognition of the UMWA as the sole bargaining agent for the workers. In Ludlow, Colorado, approximately 12 miles northwest of Trinidad, striking miners were promptly evicted from their company-owned homes. Seeking temporary shelter, approximately 1,000 miners and family members moved into a large tent colony located on leased land adjacent to company property. As the days stretched into weeks, guards hired by the mining company attempted to harass and intimidate the striking miners by aiming searchlights at the tent village after nightfall and randomly firing bullets into the tents, occasionally killing or wounding the miners or their family members. The sniper attacks prompted many of the miners to dig foxholes inside their tents so that their spouses and children could hide from the gunfire. After several months of stalemate between the workers and the mine owners, tensions finally boiled to the surface and erupted at approximately 10 a.m. on April 20th, 1914. Who or which side fired the first shots is still unclear, but the battle raged for some 14 hours, during which time the miners' tent village was ravaged by machine gun fire and eventually burned to the ground by the mining company's hired militia. What is not included in this is that the hired militia was the Colorado National Guard. The governor sent in the Colorado National Guard to evict and take out the striking miners and their families. While the final death toll has never been determined with complete accuracy, various reports place a number at anywhere from 19 to 60. Included among the dead were 4 women and children found burned to death at the bottom of one of the tent's foxholes. The next morning, the New York Times offered the sad conclusion: the Ludlow camp is a mass of charred debris, and buried beneath it is a story of horror in the history of industrial warfare. It took the president of the United States to send in the United States Army to stop the bloodshed that was happening in Ludlow. Fast forward 106, 107 years, while tensions do flare up in negotiations and failed negotiations between labor and management, we have our past to look back on and realize that our situations that we are in now are much more life-saving than they were 106 years ago. This is Davenport Central Wind Symphony. Thank you so much for being here this evening. This is Roland Barrett's Ludlow. During this piece, you will hear every single aspect of the day of the massacre, from waking up in the morning to gunfire to panic to remorse, and it concludes with a promise of hope for the future.